Howdy, humanities too. How y'all doing? We're at the end of the week, ramping down to the end of the semester. That was a quick one, quicker for you guys because you started a month later. I'm going to sign your essay six, I believe. Yeah, it is, and it's going to be on a modern artist. I'll probably list three or four. You choose which one you want to do. Do a good critical analysis of why they matter. And once again, I'm not looking for their bio um, information from Wikipedia. It's not about what makes them matter, not where they were born or when they died or who they were married to or not married, whatever. It's the art they created. So you really need to address the art they created. You might have to look at some of this stuff online. You have a week to research it and see, try to go get some wisdom and a depth knowledge about the actual art itself. Yes, you'll have to do some research, but that's what's all par for the course. And that's what the essay is about. 3 pages minimally, five on the maximum side. You could do more if you want. With a works cited page, I need to know where you get your information. So please provide that. I'll put this up on Canvas. You'll see it all today. It's Thursday. It's 8 o'clock at night, so it'll be tonight. You'll see it whenever you turn on your canvas. Um, that's the assignment. Today, I want to talk about. The other day I talked about, and I gave you some videos to look at. Hope you looked at those on modules in my lecture, and I'm trying to cover the most important 20th century artists. I'm going to miss some. You know that. If you notice, there's not a lot of women. In fact, there's no women. Women have given short shift on the art world. Why is that? Well, it's the same way in Hollywood, the filmmaking. Why do women directors? Why don't they get to direct Star Wars? Because it's a male-dominated culture, and Hollywood doesn't think they're capable of directing a big budget action film, which is complete crap. Look at Kathy Bigelow's work. We'll be talking about film later. She directed Zero Dark 30 and The Hurt Locker. I dare you to watch that movie and not think that a woman directed it. Or if you do, then you see something most people don't. Okay, so be that as it may, not a lot of women are out there. There are women artists. I'm going to cover them soon. Um, they're kind of on under the radar, as they say, um, but they're out there. And some of them were married to these people I've talked about. Jackson Pollock's wife, Willem de Kooning's wife, uh, were very, what should I say, successful artists in their own time. Most of these people have passed away. Who are the great 20th century artists right now? That's a good question. Um, the art world has changed like everything else, but in the 1970s, we're coming into an era in New York where uh, disco has been disco music. That's right, has been dominating the airwaves, which is too bad. And punk rock is emerging as an underground listening and a lifestyle aesthetic. Um, Ramones, Sex Pistols, The Clash, Patti Smith, etc., etc. If you don't know that music, you'll learn it when we talk about music next week. But anyway, this would be the late 70s, middle to late 70s in New York, a little club called CBGB's and other clubs like the Mud Club, etc. And Max's Kansas City. New York has always been a hub of artistic endeavor. People go there to succeed. People go to Hollywood to be stars. People go to New York to be artists. And there's a difference. There's a difference there, folks. There's a rougher, grittier environment, and so that reflects in the art that the artists make, whether it's painters or musicians, filmmakers. New York has its own aesthetic. LA has its own aesthetic. Um, so anyway, this music is dominating the scene, and there are people coming out of that scene who are trying to be writers, filmmakers like Jim Jarmusch, um, writers like Jim Carroll, the poet who wrote the Basketball Diaries, um, Patti Smith, poets who's got, went on to become like the high goddess of punk rock. And there are painters coming out of this scene too. Uh, Fabulous Freddie and a guy named Jean Michel Basquiat, who was a graffiti artist. Graffiti was popping up all over New York City, and his artwork was popping up. So was Keith Haring's artwork was popping up in New York City. Reminding myself to put a documentary up about these people before I forget. Anyway, um, and he was tagging these rather simple phrases, mostly phrases, not images so much. And then he would tag it, as all taggers usually have a name. He used S Samo, and essentially meaning, you've heard that term, same old, same old, same old. You know, like every day is the same, nothing changes, same old. Of course, really, it means the opposite of that. And so people started noticing this, and they started saying, "Well, who is this Samo?" And that piqued the interest of people like Andy Warhol, successful, wealthy New York artist who in these days had lost a lot of his artistic luster. He was more of a celebrity personality who was constantly filmed with celebrities at Studio 54, which was a disco of all things. You could party at the disco, do all the drugs you want, do all the sex you want. Yes, at the disco, folks, people are having sex at the tables. Yes, they were. And there's major celebrities there, anywhere from Liza, you don't have to know these people, Liza Minnelli, Jacqueline Onassis, her sister, that's Jackie Kennedy to you folks who might not remember. Um, David Bowie, Andy Warhol, these people were there and they were partying like there was no tomorrow. Fashion designers like Halston were snorting as much cocaine as they possibly could. And life was good for a few minutes before AIDS hit and just about wiped everybody out. Um, but for now, the music was raging, and so within this scene, um, Basquiat appears, and he appears to be at the right place at the right time. The East Village, which was, if you don't know anything about New York, it was considered sort of like the Haight Ashbury, if you know anything about San Francisco, of New York. It's where all the low rents were. Yes, at one time there was cheap rents in New York, and it was where all the secondhand stores were, and all the record shops and the bookshops, and all the cool people were there who didn't have any money. And the wealthier people were living on the Upper West Side and Central Park and all that. These folks can afford that. And Basquiat was couch surfing, and someone saw the potential in him. He was his mother or father, I have to remember, was from the West Indies. So he is an he's a black man in New York. I think his mother was Caucasian, and He was definitely a child of Andy Warhol, meaning he was very well who Andy Warhol was. And during his life, short life, he died at 26 of a heroin overdose in about 1988. Um, but before he did that, he painted incredible paintings that changed the art world, took him by storm. A lot of people think the art is very primitive. That's their problem. He always incorporated with the visuals. Um, he'd actually have words. He would have whole sentences, maybe whole paragraphs, and he had a wonderful poetry sense about him. And it was always engaging and meaningful and with much substance. This wasn't lost on Andy Warhol, who at one time gave him support and resurrected his desire to start painting again because he'd lost it. And he and um, Basquiat actually did a whole series of paintings together at the same time. There's documentaries about this. Maybe I'll find it. I know they're on Netflix. I don't know if they're for free. I don't think they are on YouTube. I don't want you guys to pay for this stuff, but it's definitely worth watching the Warhol and the Basquiat documentaries if you want to learn anything about who we are. It might be surprising to you. You might think, oh, wow, there's a wonderful world out there of artists holding up the mirror to who we are. So, in the meantime, we got this very energetic, charismatic black punk rock. He played in an electronic band. Also, he played music on the scene at the right time in the right place to get discovered by the right people and get represented in galleries. And once he started selling, he became wealthy very soon. His paintings now sell into the tens of millions. In his lifetime, hundreds of thousands. So he was getting some real money for the first time in his life. He didn't know what to do with it. He actually would just throw it in drawers, under pillowcases, under mattresses. He had money stuffed everywhere, and a lot of people took advantage of him. He didn't really care, and he spent a lot of that money on the lifestyle. Not fancy apartments. He always lived in modest places with women who took him in, and his biggest expense was probably his drug use, um, because he wasn't out buying yachts and sports cars. New York's not set up for that, really. Anyway, so Andy Warhol was born in the 1920s, Pittsburgh, PA. He was an outcast from the moment he was uh, old enough to remember. He was born with a bad skin condition. He was very awkward, geeky, if you want to use that word, or nerdy. Didn't quite fit in, didn't know where he was sexually with his life. Turned out that he was homosexual. Um, but living in a very Russian Orthodox community in Pittsburgh with a strict father and a mother who adored him in real poverty. He didn't know how to break out of that, and he did the only thing he could do, which millions of people have done throughout the history of this country. He moved to New York City, and without knowing anybody, but he had a portfolio. He was really good at drawing, and within a short amount of time of arriving in New York City, this would be early 50s, um, late 1940s after the war. He got work as an illustrator for a commercial illustrator. Mostly he was doing ads for fashion ads and posters, magazines, window dressing ads. That was a big deal in those days. If you could get a contract with Bloomingdale's, you could eke out a living this way. If they wanted your images, and they did. And so he had a way with drawing fashion in a clever way, a little bit of whimsy, a lot of character. And so he was actually doing pretty good, but he wanted more, of course, because it wasn't his expression. He needed to let most artists express his inner feelings about the world he sees around him. What was he seeing around him? Well, he was seeing post-World War America. He was living through the Cold War. We're at Cold War with Russia. We're in another one, folks. So first called the Soviet Union. He was in the midst of the communist witch hunts. Uh, People after World War II thought communism was going to take over America. And so they were looking for infiltrators everywhere. And it was a serious thing. They especially went after the artists because artists are usually more susceptible to new ideas. They went after Hollywood directors and writers, actors, painters, anybody who had a sense of intellectual curiosity that was outside of American democracy. And so there was that. But also, we have the veterans coming home from the war. And there was, for the first time, the GI Bill was created. These veterans could go to college on that. That was a rare thing that if you were a veteran, you could go to the GI Bill, use it to buy a house, a modest house. Not in New York City. You had to buy it in the suburbs, and that's when the suburbs were built. They started in the East Coast uh, with Levittown, which is right outside of New York, where they built 30,000 identical houses, boxes that looked exactly alike. Everybody had a little yard, a garage you could stick your car in, put a picket fence up there, and the world of suburbia started. Then that infiltrated television. Television was in its infancy in the 50s, but it was starting to dominate movies because people stopped going to the movie theater because television was free, folks. Yes, you had to sit through the ads, but the ads were nothing like the aggressive ads we have now. And there was only three channels in those days: ABC, CBS, NBC. And people were staying home in droves to watch The Honeymooners, I Love Lucy, The Marilyn Burrows Show. Game shows were hugely popular. I Got a Secret. Westerns became hugely popular. Have Gun Will Travel, Rifleman, Bonanza. And so the 50s were, they considered it a conservative era because Eisenhower was the Republican president. But when conservatives control the politics, the radical artists start emerging. And so with jazz and music, we had people like John Coltrane and Miles Davis, revolutionary jazz artists who were thriving in that era, that conservative era. These are African American artists who had a voice through their instruments known as jazz, bebop, freeform, expressionistic, improvised jazz became the hip music to do your paintings to write your novels. Novelists coming out of post World War II like Jack Kerouac and Kurt Vonnegut, Norman Mailer, Gore Vidal. These were World War II writers. Not that Gore Vidal was considered a World War II writer, but he was of that generation. And they were coming out of that era, and they were writing revolutionary novels about people that were dissatisfied, disenfranchised and had no place, they felt, in the new suburban button down world of having a job, 2.3 kids, having the nice refrigerator. It was kind of a soulless um, lifestyle. And those who wanted more, artists usually need some more creativity. They need to hear cooler music. They need to watch better movies. They need to read books. They need to write poetry and they need to make art. And Andy Warhol did that in spades. His most, his big sh- early shot to fame, he was obsessed with consumerism, people's obsession with products, television, cars, fashion, food. So he decided to paint his famous soup cans, and he painted a series of soup cans, uh, Campbell soup, and he painted them very realistic looking. I did a series. I think the first series was 30 soup cans. Shit. Hmm. Mm. Series of soup cans um, on canvas. Did them very realistic because he was a commercial artist. He could render things very realistically looking. Well, when people first saw it, they thought it was ridiculous. It looked silly. A gallery owner in California thought different, brought them all out there, and little by little, they did a really smart thing. People were interested, they saw the worth of it, but they wanted to buy one painting, two paintings, and they decided not to sell the paintings unless someone bought all of them because they are a series. And that was a bold move. And but eventually somebody did, and then it gave him enough money and enough cachet to start his own production company. He had a building in Manhattan that he did all his work. It was named the Factory, and everything stemmed from the factory. This would be 63, 64, 65. He was making art that was selling all over the world. People wanted his opinion. He became an icon of New York hipsterism for sure, absolutely. And the people he surrounded himself with, which was artists, performers, rock and roll band like the Velvet Underground, Lou Reed and Nico. And this was not lost on Basquiat. He was a little too young for that scene, but let me tell you, he was aware of it. So Warhol established an art renaissance in New York. A lot of the older abstract expressionists like Willem de Kooning and others didn't like him. They thought he was kind of a poser. Perhaps he was, and but his stuff was selling. Became the art to own. He did a series of celebrities, famous celebrities. He used this technique called silk screening. Um, he did famous people like Elvis Presley and Elizabeth Taylor and Marilyn Monroe, and these paintings became very famous. He always did a series of them. He'll do a series of Marilyns, they are called, each of them a little different, based on multimedia, mixed media, from photography to silk screening to other elements. It's not painting realism. He wasn't doing that. And then he had people working for him because the work was demanding and they needed lots of product to pay for things. And so that's why they called it the factory. And they were busy, busy, busy. And then he needed to express himself further. And so he essentially wanted to manage a rock band. So he became the manager, the supporter of the Velvet Underground, and helped produce their first record. which is a legendary record, didn't sell very many copies. Um, but he paid for it all. Also, in the meantime, he started becoming a filmmaker, what they call underground films. He wasn't filming your mom and pop's Hollywood stories, that's for sure. Sorry about these little breaks in the video. I'm still suffering from this head cold. I'm coughing and sneezing. I'm trying to keep you guys from it. So when I feel it coming on, I put it on pause. That's why the little glitches in the video. If you get this far in the video. Okay, so Warhol is dominating the art scene, and then he meets Basquiat in the 80s, and they become the darlings of the art scene. And the scene expands globally. They're selling art all over the world. They become celebrities themselves, and they die within a year of each other. Andy, um, in 1967 or so, was actually assaulted and shot. A woman tried to murder him, shot him two, three times, and really changed his life after that. The bullets destroyed a lot of major organs he had, and for the rest of his life, he had issues with kidney, spleen, liver. The bullets did a lot of damage. Um, so, but he lived. He changed after that in the 70s. He became more security conscious. He moved the factory. You could no longer just walk into the factory. There was security around. They protected him. He didn't want to get shot again. And his art changed. He changed, became a celebrity, obsessed with celebrity, and was mostly just traveling the world with rich celebrities. That meant everything to him. And so he lost his way. But he started a magazine called Interview Magazine, became very successful, still out there, folks, where they interview celebrities with a New York slant. And once again, Basquiat was very well aware of him and got made sure his art got to Warhol. Warhol felt sorry for him and bought a few pieces for $10. Warhol had a lot of money, but he was famously tight with his money. And but he saw that Basquiat had something. There were other artists around there at the same time, like Keith Haring was also a graffiti artist. He died early on of AIDS uh, during the height of the AIDS epidemic. They didn't know what it was. They called it the gay disease, gay cancer. They didn't know why, and all the straight people thought they were going to be safe. They didn't know that they could get it too, possibly through drug use, exchanging needles. Anybody with bad blood who had AIDS in their blood could give it to you. There was a nightmare of deaths in the artist world, ballet world. One of our greatest ballet artists of all time, Nuyev, died of AIDS, folks, and he was the first Russian to defect. Later on, Brezhnev came because they didn't want to live under the communism. AIDS was sweeping the nation, so there is a threat of death in their work, in their art. It's there. If you lived through the 80s, you experienced this. Death was harbinger angel that was hanging on everybody who was mostly in the art world. Okay, that's a brief on Basquiat and Warhol. When you write your papers, make sure you tell me why you think they mattered by doing the research. And here's a good way to do it: look at some of their art, try to study it, research a piece or two, look at it deeply. That's why they mattered, not how they died, not how much drugs they took or how much sex they had. That was just part of life. What makes them matter to this day Warhol is still famous. Basquiat is more famous. He'd only be, I don't think he'd even be 60 yet. I think he's born in 61 or so. So Basquiat would still be a young man. Warhol would be old, probably be 90. Um, essentially died of his bullet wound. It took him 30 years to die, but he always had a bad. Uh, I'm trying to think of the bullet had destroyed one of his major organs, and he always had trouble with it, and his gallbladder. And finally, his gallbladder gave out, exploded, so they took it out, and he died the next day. Didn't make it at I think he was 57, 58 years old, young man, in 1988. Basquiat couldn't live anymore. He was disillusioned. His art wasn't selling as much, and he took a big jolt to heroin, not to kill himself, just to numb the pain. About a year after Warhol died, and by then they were estranged. But he knew Andy's loss was almost too much for him to bear, and so they found him dead. Be that as it may, that's it, folks. 20th century art. Do you have to be messed up to create art? Do you have to be messed up on drugs? Do you have to be messed up on some obsession? Possibly. Possibly. But what's your obsession? Do you have any? Stay away from the drugs, folks, especially fentanyl. It kills everybody eventually. On that happy note, look for the assignments, watch this video, enjoy your weekend. I'll see you next week where the story of the humanities will continue, and I'll be going into the history of essentially modern music after World War II. We'll go from bebop, jazz, the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, Ramones, 80s rock like REM and Husker Du, grunge, Nirvana, hip hop, the beginnings of hip hop, how it started, how it swept the world. The revolution is on, folks. Be there for next week. I'll see you.